military culture is something that in a lot of ways is hard to put into exact words, and I don't think we can ever do it justice. The camaraderie, the attention to detail, the discipline, the ability to learn and grow, the sense that you're serving something greater than yourself, the support with regards to your brothers and sisters that are wearing uniform, having your back, helping you get through something.
I went to Berkeley, California, University. I majored in physics and mathematics. And one day, President Kennedy came by. He visited the lab, and I remember seeing him and remembering his speech.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
And that sort of changed me. It affected, where I wanted to do with my life. And so I joined the Marine Corps.
When I was in high school, we were getting ready to graduate, and the shop teacher asked us to write down what we wanted to do. I wrote down I wanted to join the Army. Because the reason I wanted to join the Army, because pretty much everybody was getting drafted. But the best thing about joining the Army, I could use the GI Bill when I got out so I could become a barber.
I received an updated draft notice of 1A, which meant I was probably going to be drafted really soon. I decided that if I get drafted, I would be in for 2 years, having no idea what they would have me do. I decided I would rather do 3 years and do what I want to do. I've always been interested in aircraft, so when I went in the Army, I wanted something to do with aircraft. I didn't want to plod through the swamp. I'd rather be in the air.
Well, I come from kind of a military family. My dad signed up for the Air Force ROTC, so he became an Air Force officer. So our first assignment was Air Force Base, obviously, and it's the first time I came close to airplanes. I was 6 years old, and from that moment, I wanted to fly. And I got a letter from Uncle Sam saying, "Greetings from the President," because once you graduated in 67, 68, Vietnam was a hot topic. So I told the recruiter, I got to get in. You got to get me. I don't want to go in the Army. I want to be a pilot. So he got me into an Air Force basic training class 2 days ahead of my draft date. I'd never been in an airplane till I got into the Air Force.
After I graduated, I think I had limited options since I wasn't really prepared to go to college. I did visit the Marine Recruitment Center, and they offered me a 4-year option with no training, but a guaranteed trip to Vietnam. I also visited the Army Recruitment Center. They had a program where I could learn a skill. 3 years would be my required time in the service, and that seemed more reasonable.
So I was in high school and didn't have the opportunities to have college paid for or any real opportunities, and so my decision was to go into the military.
I started looking at things, infantry, because a lot of the people who helped raise me, not the least of which was Dad, who was a super lifer. He served for 31 years in the Army. He was born on the 4th of July, so the quintessential patriot in that respect. And you're living on these military posts, and you're formed by all these other military guys. My first Little League coaches were military guys. They were either officer or enlisted. When I really made a commitment towards it was probably through junior ROTC in high school. And then when I applied for Army scholarships, and I was awarded a full ride 3-year scholarship. And at that point, you're in.
Well, I'm from Weatherford, Texas, which is a very small town, and I graduated high school at 16. The idea of going to college wasn't really on my radar at the time. So my family has always served. My father was a Marine in Korea, and my grandfather was in World War II. I had 2 uncles in Vietnam. And so it's always just kind of been accepted that military was an option. But at 16, I would have been going in at 17, and I had to get my parents to approve it. And they would not approve me going into the Marines, so we decided on the Army.
9/11 and the attack on the Twin Towers had just taken place. And in addition to that, I had friends that were telling me that there was a vast shortage of chaplains in the United States Navy and in the Army at that moment in time. And I found myself thinking that the nation was at war, and it was wrong. It just wasn't right that service members might not be able to get to a chaplain if they needed to find one.
In boot camp, I did very well. In fact, I was awarded the American Spirit Medal for the highest ranking recruit across all the major services. And that's what helped me get into OCS later.
I told my friend, I says, hey man, he says, I joined the Army. His name was Tim Bowen. He goes, you did? And I go, yeah. I said, I'm going in November 27th, I'll be going in. And he goes, maybe I should go. So he went down and he signed up. And a lot of people hate basic training, but we had a lot of fun because of the two of us. And we were both characters, so we had everybody laughing.
Actually, it wasn't that hard for me. I played football in high school. It was pretty much like football practice in the summer in Michigan and a hot, muggy day. They shaved our heads. And one of the funny stories of that is one of the guys, his hair was long and greasy and it stopped the clippers.
So I went through Air Force Basic, came out as an airman, second class. About that time, I got picked for officer training school, so I went through officer training school. And
My first 4 months were relatively the same as anyone else's in training. First you go to basic training, which I did at Fort Ord, and it's basically physical training, intimidation, respect, keep your mouth shut, don't volunteer for anything, clean, and polish and polish and march and practice shooting a gun, getting screamed at quite a bit, all the kinds of things you'd never experienced in your civilian life up to that point.
Back in 1975, the men and women were separated, the Women's Army Corps and the Army. Basic training was 12 weeks, and so I shared the barracks with 40 other women from around the country.
As a cadet, what was called advanced camp, and then I did that for 6 weeks and 3 weeks of cadet troop leadership training. Ostensibly, it was for officer training, but you're really getting the ground up kinds of things on how to handle a weapon, the preliminaries of leadership and things like that. But the rubber meeting the road in true terms of when my training started with the military was when I got commissioned. I went through officer's basic.
We were the only female platoon in an all-male company, all-male battalion. It was early 80s, and there wasn't a lot of women at the time. So, I mean, I did well in basic because I'm from Texas and I knew how to shoot and was farm raised, so I had a good work ethic. It was learning a lot about a lot of people. I was there with a lot of people from New York and a lot of people from Puerto Rico, and I'm a small town Texas person, and it was just, you learn to trust a different type of person, but everything is hard. They make it hard. They tear you down to build you back up into a soldier.
There are a number of officers in the United States Navy that are direct commissioned officers. And these would be chaplains, these would be lawyers or JAGs, these would be nurses, nursing corps, this would be doctors, medical corps. And so together we all do our training in one specific location, and that location is Newport, Rhode Island. And so I found myself there in terms of my initial training, which was Officer Indoctrination School, and it's what it sounds like, understanding basically basic militarization.
So anyway, we got our orders to go to our next station, which was AIT, to learn your job that you took. I went as an engineer school for generators.
I went to pilot training at Moody Air Force Base in Georgia. First time I ever got on an airplane. First plane I trained on was a T-41, and they tried to figure out, can you fly an airplane? Do you get lost? Do you get airsick? It was exciting for me because I'd never done it, but it's something I always wanted to do, and I guess I had a knack for it.
And it turned out almost as soon as I met Laura, I got accepted to OCS. So I immediately got accepted, went to Quantico, got commissioned as an officer in time to train a platoon of Marines as we were headed out to Vietnam.
Well, the skills were basically learning to take care of a Huey and what makes it fly, a helicopter. I was first in my class, but I never really attributed that to being smarter than the other guys. It was just that I'd already had a lot of that training.
Oh, the most exciting plane I ever flew was a T-38. You got to remember, the guys in my class, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months prior to getting in this plane, we were fraternity brothers studying for finals someplace. And now we're flying a plane that goes Mach 1.3, that's faster than the speed of sound. And it always amazed me when I was going through it, how much we were doing that we had no idea even existed, 8, 9, 10 months ago.
At Fort Leonard Wood, it was advanced infantry training, so we learned more about how to shoot guns and do maneuvers. And there were things that would help you if you got in a combat situation. Basically, they taught you somewhat how to kill. I mean, I think that was kind of the purpose, is to survive and win.
After basic training, and it had become the Army, and I had signed up to be military police K-9, I went to MP school, and that as well was another 12-week program to be a handler. I was assigned what would be known today as a patrol dog to do apprehension and tracking, and really opened my eyes to their capabilities beyond what I had seen from a guide dog.
I went first to Ranger School and then Airborne School. They harass you in ways that I won't go into that were far more legal 40 years ago that aren't now. But they do it with the attitude that war is going to be a lot worse. And it was an extreme environment. Just several months before I got there, 3 guys died from exposure in Winter Ranger School. So it's on your mind, and it shapes you.
My AIT was at Aberdeen Proving Grounds, which is where they do a lot of testing for firing systems, tanks and every kind of weapon. The training was a lot of electronics, a lot of understanding optics, a lot of, like I said, it was early days of laser range finding, and that was fascinating. You would learn to lock in on something, and then, no matter where you were, you pull the trigger and it goes to where it was locked in on.
I moved really across the base to the Navy Chaplain School, and that was specific training in what does it mean to be a United States Navy chaplain? What does it mean to provide religious services for your own faith group? What does it mean to make sure that you're facilitating for others so that everybody has their First Amendment rights to freedom of religion? What does it mean, regardless of whether a person has faith or not, to deeply care for all? And also, what does it mean to be an ethical advisor to the command? And so it was a lot of class time, followed at the end by about a week in the field. We need to be ready to orient ourselves and to move out in the field along with Marines and sailors, wherever we find them, whether in ships or in the front lines.
I didn't end up going to Vietnam right after AIT. I went to another class, and it was called Shake and Bake. So we learned a lot about orientation skills, camouflage skills, ways of eating and drinking to keep us healthy and motivated.
There were several challenging aspects of training. You're housed with 40 other women, and with all different kinds of personalities and different backgrounds and different upbringing. That combined with the attitude of women really didn't belong in the military. I'm a blue-eyed redhead. I am as stubborn as you get. And So the more they threw at me, the more stubborn that I became, and decided that, you know, they weren't going to beat me, which just gave me a fighting spirit to keep pushing through and take whatever was handed to me.
One day you're a civilian, the next you're doing all this stuff. It was exciting as well. You wonder if you're ever going to be put in the maw of battle. And it scares you too. It's one of those weird paradoxes where you want it and you don't, or at least in my case.
I had been the miler in our high school, so I was really physically fit, more so than most other recruits. I think most of the challenges came when I was asked to go to Vietnam. I think I was a lot more scared about what the unknowns were.
I was in one of the first units to go to Vietnam, which was very fortunate because we had the opportunity to train as a unit before we went there. And we went over there by ship, so it wasn't a quick flight into Vietnam. It was a long journey, and we didn't know if we were going to Vietnam. We didn't even know if there was going to be a war yet at that time. Before we left, we filled out our wills, so it kind of gave us a hint that we were heading into something.
Every one of us got orders to go to Vietnam. And when we landed was a base called Bien Hoa Air Base. It was not too far from Saigon. And then from there, they'll send us out to where we're going to go. And I went in the orderly room where the first sergeant was, and he looked at my thing, he says, 5220, what's the heck's that? I go, power plant operator pyramid. He goes, never heard of it, but I'll give you a couple of jobs you can pick from if you want.
I always think back and think I was a lucky 50%. When I first went in and got the helicopter training, I was figuring I was going to be on a helicopter in Vietnam. Well, they decided half the class was going to Vietnam and the other half was going to South Korea. I was into South Korea because my last name started with R. They split it by the alphabet. I say that's the lucky 50 because I loved the job in South Korea. I was a helicopter crew chief in a medevac unit. I got to fly left seat because they just had the one pilot and a medic in the back. They taught me to fly the helicopter because they wanted me to be able to get us down if something happened to the pilot.
Well, the C-41 was my first assignment out of pilot training. Frequently went into Vietnam. You'd bring a cargo in, cargo out. And some of the flights were air evacuations where we had wounded troops. And they were very rewarding trips because you got kids out that were banged up pretty bad.
Now it's getting closer to the evening now and everything, and it's hot. I can't relax. I don't know what's going to happen next or anything. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. I start hearing some explosions, like, you know, far away. And then as time went on, it seemed like they were getting closer, you know. I didn't realize the reason people didn't like that job, because you're sleeping on the flight line, and that's what they want to blow up every night, is the helicopters. A friend of mine that I've known for a while, he was on his second year in Vietnam, and he come down there and he says, hey man, he says, we need a gunner. These are gunships. And I says, yeah, man. So I went over there and asked the sergeant in the hangar, I says, hey, I want to fly with the band. And she says, well, if you want to die, get the hell out of here.
At Travis, I got on what's called the Palace Cobra list. That means you're going to Vietnam, and they said, what plane do you want to fly? And so I chose a relatively easy plane to learn, EC-47, electronic reconnaissance plane. Our mission was we flew 7 hours, 10,000 feet. We had 2 pilots, a navigator, and a bunch of national security agency intelligent people in the back that speak fluent Vietnamese, could do Vietnamese Morse code. And they were on headsets and they were dialing through radio frequencies to try to pick up traffic. And if they did, and it was somebody important, the navigator had equipment where they do a line of position from where the plane is to the heading, to bearing, to where the transmission came from. Then you'd fly an arc and keep shooting different bearings, and you could get a cross section and know where it was. We didn't know what was going on most of the time. The pilots in front would just, somebody would say turn left, turn right, whatever, we'd do it. Every once in a while, though, you'd find somebody important. In fact, we were over the Central Highlands, and called me up on the intercom and said, we just found a North Vietnamese division we had been looking for a long time. And about an hour later, they said, look out your window. And they had diverted a B-52 strike, which is 3 B-52s, to come in and just take out the location, at least of the transmitter, and probably 2 miles, 3 miles on either side of that. That was one of the few times we really saw the benefits of what we did firsthand. All of our intelligence went back to Saigon.
I was deployed in 1971, and I ended up there 9 months later in 72. First assignment was a landing zone for helicopters, and my assignment was to guard the perimeter. I was there about 3 or 4 months. The ARVNs were there too, and we went out a couple of times with them searching for VC.
So it's interesting. I had to fight to get into the Canine Corps. So after Canine School, I got assigned to Hawaii, and the orders got shortened because I was invited back to be an instructor.
You go through jobs fast when you're an officer, and it's just expected that you sink or swim. My first platoon assignment, I was a platoon leader, and that was by August of 1983. I'm barely shaving every day, and people are saluting me. You know, I was commissioned when I was 22. By the time I was done with my training, I'm 23 in my first assignment. People calling me sir, and what do you really know in those days at that level when you're 22 and 23? Ranger School bridged a lot of gaps, especially with tactics and how to handle small unit kinds of command. And the first thing I did when I walked into my platoon, I walked up to my platoon sergeant and I said, you know, call me sir all the live long day and night as you want, but I know who's in charge of this platoon, and I respect that. And that was the best thing that I could do, because he took me in under his wing, and at that point he did tutor me to where I was effective and useful by the time I left the job 13 months later.
Learned all about optics and electronics and firing systems and laser rangefinders and all that. It was fascinating. It was all new technology and presented in a way that, you know, you understand that that's how, you know, whatever firing system you're working on is going to work. I was in the repair side of all that, and you had to, you know, get in and out of tanks and out of Bradleys and just different types of firing systems to make sure that they were aligned. And you realize how important it is, because a lot of times if something misfires like a tank does and it doesn't go straight down and you've messed up somehow, it could blow up.
Right around Halloween of 2007, I received a call, and it was my supervisory chaplain. Congratulations, Chaplain Riley. And I said, well, that's great. Congratulations for what? Well, you're going forward. Where am I going? You're going to Iraq as the flight line chaplain in the Al Anbar province. Now, what that meant for me at that moment in time was the care of all Marines. And at that point in time, it was 10 squadrons, so it was large. And in that particular flight line, I had squadrons that were Air Force, squadrons that were Navy, and squadron that was Army, and the rest of the squadrons, about 6 or 7 of them, were all Marine Corps squadrons. For me, that meant the care of our people in a combat area, and as we came into that area, we came in fully loaded and ready to fight, coming straight off the plane. As we entered the plane, there was the sense that many of the Marines had never been in combat before, and so as a chaplain, I was placed near the front of the aircraft where the Marines could see me. Sometimes for us as chaplains, it's not so much of what we say, but sometimes we're a reminder of God's presence and of God's peace on them. And so for a moment, just as the aircraft was getting ready to go, there would be me making eye contact with Marines and basically just giving them a look of assurance.
We were always on alert because we were within artillery range of North Korea, and you never know. So you're a little bit nervous all the time, but you learn to go with it.
I got to Vietnam in June of '72, but the rocket attacks at Da Nang were if nothing else, scary. When they got launched, we had planes flying cover overhead, and they'd see the launch of the rockets, and the sirens would go off, and the PA system would say, "Rockets, rockets, rockets." Da Nang was under attack. By the time they said "Kets" on the first rocket, I was under the bed. You just learned, and that's the only thing you do is dive under the bed for that. So that was the scariest part of Da Nang.
The first major battle between the Marine Corps and the North Vietnamese occurred in March of 1966. The operation was called Operation Utah. And in that battle, there were about 700 men killed. North Vietnamese and American Marines. So it was a bloodbath, and occurred over maybe three days, and occurred in an area that was very small, maybe a couple square miles. There were parts of that battlefield where you could not walk without stepping on bodies, because that's how intense and close it was. Of course, when the Marines committed us, they sent over 600 troops, and we ran into 2 regiments of North Vietnamese and Viet Cong, over 2,000. So we were greatly outnumbered, we were overrun, and we were just struggling to keep together. That night we were finally able to consolidate and call airstrikes down in our position so that we could survive. And eventually we won the battle. Everybody I talked to who was in that battle would tell you that that was the most intense battle that they had ever been in, no matter how many tours they had in Vietnam.
My father's name is Jack Thomas Kennedy. He was Air Force Master Sergeant, and he was part of the skunk crew out of Beale Air Force Base during the Cold War and Vietnam War. When I was 10, we moved off base because my father was now going to Vietnam. He was at that time in charge of loading bombs onto fighter jets. And so those planes were coming and going over the countryside. They were using Agent Orange, the substance to eliminate foliage in those areas, and as we know nowadays, it was a very bad chemical and affected him. Unfortunately, we lost my dad 4 years ago to ALS, which now the VA recognizes as a potential problem for ALS.
I think my 4th week or something, I was flying with him. Somebody called up, it was a real bad area, they needed some help really quick. So we went over there and man, shit was happening, man. We were banging up everything. We came in on our 2nd run, and all of a sudden, man, I felt on my back, I felt this, like, poof, like, it was just a compression, like, and I looked there, and the crew chief was falling to the floor. He was trying to talk, he was falling to the floor. I saw smoke and fire coming out of the instruments and stuff, and we were going down. All I could see that there was all this jungle, one little area of rice paddy, that if we even make it that far. So I opened his shirt up. I tried to help him and stuff, man, but he bled out. About that time, we hit the ground, and the other gunship behind us, they came, and so my roommate was on the other helicopter. He was a gunner over there. So we grabbed my crew chief I definitely died right there, and I put him on the helicopter. And as we were picking him up in his arms, I heard the pilot on that side says, "I feel weak," and I looked at him, and whole back of his leg was all blown away, and his fingers and stuff, and he fell to the ground. So we picked him up, put him on the helicopter, and the pilot, what I was on, he kept telling me to get my shit off the chopper, my guns and stuff. So I took my M60 out of the helicopter, and a big box of ammo, took it down. And I was there all by myself. He took off, and then he wanted to get it out of the enemy area. And all of a sudden, everybody left. And for having all the shit going on around us before that all happened, I'm sitting down there, man, and it was the loneliest feeling I ever had in my life. It was so quiet. You just left a big terrorizing place, and now all of a sudden it's just so quiet. And that bothered me because it was quiet. So waiting and waiting, and finally a chopper came and picked us up, took us back. Next morning, I got another helicopter, started flying again.
When we were there, we would fly up to the DMZ. I actually got combat pay for it. There was always firefights up there, and one of the guys I really remember was a soldier that stepped on a landmine, and it blew all the skin right off his hand, and you could see his bones like a skeleton. I realized it didn't bother me when I was helping him. It was afterwards. You'd get back and your flight suit might be covered in blood, and you just took care of him. So.
The place where I got shot at the worst, I'm flying along, fat, dumb, and happy, about 20 miles from the North Vietnamese border in daylight, and all of a sudden I hear this pop, 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 pop. So I'm not trained to do evasive maneuvers. I'm just a reconnaissance pilot, right? So the thought that went through my mind was, what would John Wayne do? I don't know why. I went to full power, stepped on the rudder, banked the airplane, and pulled this way just to take evasive actions. And right when I got about here, the sky exploded right where I would have been. It was a little scary, a little scary. And as it turned out, February 5th, we lost one of our planes, got shot down on a night tank finding mission about 10 miles from the North Vietnamese border over Laos. Lost everybody, found them 2 days later. I have a good friend of mine who was supposed to be the aircraft commander on that flight. Came down with a migraine during pre-flight at midnight. He got a backup aircraft commander to replace him. Plane took off. Last heard from at 2:30 in the morning. They found it 2 days later. Next day, Paul walks in the squadron, and they thought they were seeing a ghost.
And then another place that I transferred to up this road called Fort Smith. It was raining all the time, and so the whole landing zone was mud, and it was horrible. And the mosquitoes were huge. And at one of the stops to pick up some water, there were 5 Viet Cong bundled up, lying on the side of the road as a display to other Viet Congs that were in the area that this could happen to you if you don't watch it. And at that point, I know I was in deep trouble, but I didn't really know what I was doing. I was not thinking. I was pretty scared. I just really felt lonely and really just living moment by moment. So we were there about 3 or 4 months, and eventually we got run over. The Viet Cong came in and started shelling us and going through our perimeter, and we had big firefights for several days, and finally they broke through, and we got in our trucks and left, everything there, and it was pretty gory. It wasn't a smooth transition. It was a run and get in a truck and let's get the hell out of here.
I'm not going to say I was the first female canine handler or instructor, but I'm one of the first. There was this one group, this one class where I think we had 3 or 4 women out of the 20 that were in the class, and you know that dog is a deadly weapon. This particular day, there was one female who was in a bite sleeve, and the dog, for whatever reason, came off of the wrap and came up and got her in the chest. It was a traumatic, horrible incident. We had to get the dog off the bite, get her immediately to the hospital, and she's scarred for life.
I still think of, from time to time, having to defuse that mortar. We were doing live fire exercise at Camp Roberts, and we had 2 duds, and it was night fire exercise. Part of what happens is you drop it in there and it doesn't fire, and you're worried that the guns are so hot that maybe it'll cook off, so you wait a few minutes. But if it doesn't fire eventually, you have to take the mortar, and it's heavy as all get out. 2 guys are lifting the weapon, hoping it doesn't fire while they're holding it, and disconnecting it from the base plate. And then as a platoon leader, I have to stand in front of the gun with a flashlight, and it's dark, except we're not going tactical at this point. You shine a light while they lift the gun higher and higher, and then there's a guy in front who's trying to catch the round, and you're giving him a play-by-play where the round is. Get ready, here it comes. You're hoping it doesn't arm, or it's not arm, or that it doesn't cook off, because if it cooks off, I'm sure going to be the dead guy, because I have to stand right in front of it, and or if it blows up, then we're all dead. I mean, everything within about a 15-meter radius is gone. Even in training in the military, you encounter stuff like that all the time.
You do a lot of field work. I mean, there wasn't combat happening, but there's constant training happening. We were testing a Abrams tank, and Abrams was shooting downrange at a target, and it didn't go all the way through the barrel. So when that happened, they all jumped out and we left. Well, it ended up a banana. It blew off in the barrel, and the whole thing was just, I mean, that was scary and loud, and you're doing the whole what if I was still standing where I was standing and all that.
When we were in Afghanistan, I probably came under fire about 100 or more times. And that was everything from rocket attacks to mortars to ambushes on convoys. One particular time, it was coming under sniper fire. We had landed at a forward base, way forward in the Kunar Valley. And as we landed, the helicopter that had brought us in, the Black Hawk, took off and let flares go. And all of a sudden, we started taking sniper fire. It's interesting, as you think about combat, you often think that it's loud, but sometimes it's distant, it's quiet.
Going home, my friend, Barrera, asked me to, if I could go to his parents' house and drop off some little gifts. He took picture albums, and he wanted me to explain everybody in the picture albums with him. I go, man, Barrera, you're gonna be home, man. I don't know what the heck all this is about. I made sure I got to go see his parents and everything, and told him, oh, he'll be okay and all that kind of stuff. And so anyway, I get back to Vietnam. I had all this stuff from his parents to give him, and I was kind of really happy about it. So I went in the flight room to see if who was flying, and I said, is Barrera around? Oh, didn't you know? Barrera died yesterday morning. There was 2 helicopters crashed, and he burned to death. Man, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. It's just like, what? I went to go develop some pictures that I had. I took in while I was home. People had a little booth outside that they had, and she says, where's your friend at? I go, my friend, who's that? She goes, oh, just a minute. She goes in the back and gets this envelope of pictures. Barrera, it was Barrera. He had pictures taken of him just before he died.
It would have been early '69. The 82nd Airborne was going to do an airdrop with the Korean Army, and our helicopter was assigned to go out and camp or bivouac and train for if we were covering, like in a field hospital, picking up anybody that got injured and stuff. It was up to Larry because he was one rank above me. He decided he wanted to stay back, and so I went out camping, and that night they had a firefight in the DMZ, and he went up there, and they picked up a big load of ambulatory patients, and after they took off, they crashed and killed everybody. I could have been that. It makes you really think about your vulnerability and how fragile life is, and it just changes your whole perspective.
I lost some friends over there. I had 2 of my classmates got shot down the same day in 1970. I lost some other friends. Going through it, I knew we weren't going to, quote, win in the classic, defeating the enemy. It was going to be at best a draw. So I felt it was kind of a waste, but I just wanted to get home. That's all.
It's a fellow lieutenant who is a fellow XO in one of the other companies. And when we really ramped up to being a rapid deployment, we were anxious. And We partied hard together and talked about it and what that might look like. But the fear, particularly for him, I don't know that I would want it if I had gotten killed in combat for him to expose himself to picking me up. But he wanted to make sure that if he was, that his body wasn't left behind, and we, made a blood promise, that was going to happen. So yeah, how do you, yes, you form bonds.
You make a lot of really good friends in the military because you're in such close quarters and you rely on these people so much. But unfortunately, you move a lot. And so you make really deep connections and then nothing ever comes of it.
As a chaplain, I have access to my commanding officers, those that are in full command. And sometimes the myth is that these are crusty people that, that are just all blood and guts. But the reality is that at those upper echelons of command, you have people, men and women, that are fathers, that are husbands, that are wives. And for them, there's a sense of deep care. There's also a sense of deep responsibility over their troops. An understanding that decisions that they make can impact the lives, and not just impact the lives, but can impact the very survivability of the troops under their care. The weight is enormous. The stress is high. And a good chaplain is the person that can speak the hard word to their commanding officer. Sometimes, though, that is a matter of care, never forgetting that you're their chaplain as well. I carry on a Marine Corps uniform, I'll carry my rank on my right collar, but on my left collar is a cross. It's my chaplain device. If I'm a Muslim chaplain, it's a half moon. If I'm a Buddhist chaplain, it's a wheel. If I am a Jewish rabbi, it's the Ten Commandments. Your right collar gives you access and the ability to make a difference for those under your care and your leadership. But never forget, this is why you're in the Corps. Chaplain first, officer second.
I had 3 weeks left, and the sergeant came and started putting the names up, who's flying tomorrow, And we were out there, and he says, guys, we're going into Cambodia tomorrow. And there's one thing people don't realize, if we know it, they know it. So, they're going to be expecting us. I know they are. I figured, man, I've been in Vietnam over 2 years, I said, it's time. I'm getting ready to go home. It's time for the new generation to take my spot.
My last flight was in the same area where I just described, where I got shot at pretty good. And I told the guys the schedule. I said, listen, this is my last flight. Why send me to the most dangerous section of all we're flying in? You give me a milk run someplace. I went up, did my thing, came back, landed, I'm done. The next day, the same mission, they came back with a 6-foot hole in their wing.
The experience of a veteran getting out when I did during peacetime, it was harder than I think, just switching jobs, because you're going from somewhere where you have so much responsibility and trust in what you do, to getting out and, you could be a clerk somewhere or, get a very low impact job. But for people leaving Vietnam, and especially veterans of places where there was a lot of protests, was incredibly, incredibly hard.
The military wasn't like much then. I always remember when I was discharged in Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I bought a first-class ticket home and I wore my uniform. I said, heck with all those guys.
I finally finished my tour and everything, and got on that plane, ended up in the United States. And what was bad about ending up in the United States here, I was all happy and proud, who I was. People were pounding on the buses, baby killers, calling us all kinds of names and stuff. It made me really feel really crappy, man, that here I was all proud of, who I am, and these people were disgrading me, it wasn't a good feeling anyway,
It was, unfortunately, a very ugly war. And so there were things that were being told to people back here in the US. And so when my father came home, he was spit upon and called a baby killer. They looked at anyone in a uniform at that time with such hate. And, you know, he hid. He hid his persona, his uniform. You know, if we were out in public, we were not to talk about what my dad did.
I came home like, I don't know, 35 days early. So I didn't tell my wife. So I land at Travis. I call up one of the wives and said, hey, I just got home. Can you pick me up and give me a ride home? It just surprised my wife. And that's what I did.
Things I can remember was how angry I was and how upset I was. I hadn't realized it. But I did get on a plane and I went home. My parents, for some reason, didn't show up at the airport and had me take a taxi home. And at that point, I was so upset about everything that I started to beat up my father.
On that day when I'm signing my exit papers, they really didn't prepare you for any kind of transition. I got out and didn't have a plan. I at least had some friends that were supportive, that let me stay with them while I got my feet underneath me. And then I had another friend who said, you know, Mary, why don't you come up to Boston and go to school? You know, I remember wondering what the heck I did and thinking about going back in. And thank goodness for that friend. I'm forever grateful because that got me into electronics, which got me into the IT field before there was a thing called IT, and started my career. You need somebody to help you with that transition because you really are lost. That culture that we were talking about is so much part of you and you're missing it. You're missing that camaraderie, you're missing that speaking the same language, that routine.
Reason I left the Marine Corps, you know, I was looking forward to a career in the Marine Corps. But then one day when I was a duty officer, I got a call in that a man had been traumatically injured, and his wife, young wife, still lived there in Camp Pendleton. And the chaplain wasn't around, so I asked my wife to come with me. I mean, my wife had no training in any of this, no experience. I just knew that she was a loving, caring person, so I asked her to come with me to help me deliver this news. So we went there and we delivered the news, and my wife was comforting this young girl. And it dawned on me that, you know, the wives who are sitting back there have no idea what's going on. They don't know when they're going to get a call in the middle of the night. And my wife had been living that through my previous deployment. And so I thought, well, you know, I can't put her through that through another deployment. And what if I didn't come back?
I was 10 when my father went off to Vietnam, and it was my first experience taking care of horses. And what I didn't realize was those horses were really taking care of me. I remember after a year of missing my dad because he was gone that long, when he came back, we were moving again. And it's a very common situation for military kids.
People talk about the people that went to Vietnam, the people that stayed home had it tough. Not just my wife, but mothers, dads, brothers, sisters, girlfriends, you know, pick one, wives. I'll tell you a story about my wife. When Paul McGuire, the guy that didn't take the flight that got shot down, he came up a month ahead on me. So I told him, Paul, my wife's name is this, my address is this. Just stop in, tell her I'll be home soon, I'm fine. This is like 2 months after that plane got shot down. So he made a mistake. He went up to see her in his full military blues. She saw him coming and thought it was a notification team. She thought I was dead or missing. She refused to answer the door. She told me later, I figured if I didn't answer the door, it didn't happen. But yeah, it was tough. It was hard on the people back home.
And you cannot be in an area of combat without it changing you.
I was serving with those that were trying to make a career out of the military, who had had service in Vietnam, so they were in country or in theater. They were changed. We didn't know then what we know now. And they were hardened, I guess, a way to look at it.
They didn't have the help back then that they do now. There was no psychotherapy. There was nothing. It was called shell shock and just buck it up, soldier. You know, that's the way it was.
I was wounded deeply, not physically, but I think spiritually and emotionally. You know, there are wounds that we suffer in our lives that we will never heal from.
Being in the service, coming out of the service, and transitioning from the service to an ordinary life is a very difficult thing for a lot of veterans, women and men.
When my father came home from Vietnam that year and had witnessed that, he was very angry. And my mother told us to just leave him alone. Don't ask him for anything. At that age, you don't really understand, where is the anger coming from? Is it about me? Are you mad at me? As a child, you just quickly learn to accept your situation, because there's not a lot you can do to cover them in love. It's just waiting and being patient, which is very difficult for a kid. When you just want to hug your dad, you haven't seen him in a year. You want to ask him all kinds of questions, which he can't answer.
When the VA was created, it was created after World War II. And it was created to deal with physical injuries. Technology and weaponry isn't what it is today. And so there wasn't an understanding of the psychological impacts or the trauma that goes along with it.
PTSD is a very real phenomenon. I think civilians don't understand veterans because they haven't lived it. I think a lot of times people judge a veteran and their actions on what they think they know. When someone has PTSD, it's a different world that they're seeing. But when you think about it in the way that if they just came back from Afghanistan or something, and every day they had to deal with constantly worrying about, is this, woman or this child or whatever here to harm me, and now your head's back in that space, you're not going to react rationally.
And I think it's the right push to take away post-traumatic stress disorder and change it to post-traumatic stress injury, because it is an injury. Trauma will forever profoundly change the brain. We can do lots of treatments and tools and techniques, but there will always be a scar, and you never know when that scar is going to be stretched and something's going to be triggered, which is how service dogs can really help. They help to navigate life and make a profound difference. It's like having a therapist with you 24 hours a day.
I talked to somebody about PTSD the other day, and he talked about physical trauma, and he talked about emotional trauma. And one thing that I had never heard about before, but was moral trauma.
A moral injury is that moment in time when we break our own protocols, when we're the ones that break our own moral code. Sometimes things happen around us that are less than they should be, and they devastate our own hearts, and we suffer moral injury that way.
I mean, when you go through a war and you see innocent children being killed and maimed, there's a moral trauma to that I don't think we pay attention to enough.
I think one of the most important things that a veteran can do is talk to other veterans. You really realize that a lot of people struggle on their own. But as soon as they can be in a room with someone who, they don't even have to talk, but someone who understands what they've gone through, then it makes truly a completely different life for them.
In this last year, I joined a group there's like 11 of us that are veterans, and we all get together every Tuesday for lunch, and we just love getting together and talking. So many great stories.
Once a week we get to hang out with some pretty remarkable people from all walks of life in the military, and you will find that they're a microcosm of society in the chosen professions, in their politics, but there is something that when you come together, you are still going to be friends, and that it reminds me of those days.
Somebody that understands where you're coming from. I had an uncle who was a top turret gunner in B-17s in World War II, and he would tell me stories. His wife was married to him for 60 years. She said, "Bruce, he's never told me the stories he's telling you." And with vets, it's just it's kind of a celebration of we're still here 50, 60 years after we got out. We can share stories with one another without fear of judgment. We get together and just have fun.
I think it's just really important that civilians understand that somebody coming out of a combat situation or a veteran in general, that's, you don't have a lot of choices in your life. A lot of the choices are made for you, so you can't judge them on something they did that wasn't their choice.
I think that being a veteran is a really honorable and hard emblem to hold on to. And a lot of veterans, I believe, are ashamed or don't want to talk about it. But I think they really want to talk about it, but they just don't know how to do it. And so I've been able to do, with the help of my wife and my children and a lot of VA help and my own persistence, grinding to the point where I knew something was wrong and I'm going to figure it out, came to where I am now. So I'm an outspoken Vietnam veteran, and I don't really know that many of us are out there. And so I think I'm lucky.
This was always in my mind, though, the Operation Utah and what we said and did there and didn't do there. So it was always in my mind, but I never talked about it, I never thought about it until about 2016. I was working for Hitachi Data Systems at that time, and we had a conference in Da Nang. And Da Nang was close to where this Operation Utah had occurred. It was hardly recognizable because, over 50 years and the vegetation had grown back, names of towns were gone. But when I came back to Morgan Hill, I wrote a little article about it, and Michael Moore in the Morgan Hill paper put it in his online newspaper. And so it went out on the internet. And I didn't think much about it, but then later, as I started getting emails and phone calls from people asking about Operation Utah, asking if I knew of their son or their brother or husband who had been in that war. And they were just dying for information. In those days, they would just send you a short telegram that says, so-and-so was killed by hostile fire in the province of Queen Yan. And that's all you get to hear. What else is there? These people, their relatives, loved ones, they wanted to know more. And so to help them out, I started to research. I started to get in contact with people and see who knew stories about all these people. And I decided to write a book about it. And it was a book that was going to be a tribute to all these people who had been killed in Vietnam. From the different viewpoint of the artillerymen for the different company positions. And I even found the diary of the North Vietnamese soldier. And you know what was amazing about that was this soldier had just been a farm boy. And he was just as homesick and as scared as anybody else. And he was killed there. During that process, a lot of the veterans contacted me and said, I helped to bring closure. I helped to find the ending of their stories by doing this research. And so that has given me a lot of satisfaction, and I've been able to help people. And it's also helped me to find a lot of satisfaction and resolution to a lot of things that I had been concerned about, what had bothered me for so many times. You see, one of the things that happened there was I was called to rescue a platoon that had gotten cut off. And to help me do that, this other company had given me their radio man, and he was with me. We went there. Fortunately, we were able to rout the North Vietnamese and rescue that platoon. And at the end of that, we just hauled out of there. And when I got back there, because I checked on all my men, and everybody was there, you know, I never checked on that radio man that had come with me from that other company. So for many years, I would think, what did I do? I forgot about him. Did he make it back? What happened? You know, I didn't even know his name. But during the process of writing this book, I talked to the lieutenant who was in that other company. And he said, oh yeah, that's Hanson. He made it back. And you know, that was sort of just a relief off my mind.
I went back, been back to Vietnam 8 times. The first time I went back to Vietnam, went up there and actually cried a little bit. I said, what am I doing? What the hell are you doing, Ed? Shit, you know, what the hell you want to go to Vietnam for? Because all that's in my mind is what I saw when I was there, you know. We're going down the road, and everything's the same as it was when I left the SIF. There was no weapons, no military, and there was hardly anybody anywhere. I took Barrera's picture with me. We left Saigon and went over to this beach area. I did a little ceremony for Barrera. I put his picture up on this little table, and I lit the candle, and I looked at the picture and I said, Barrera, I'm going to take you home. You're going home.
All of a sudden, out of the clear blue, I get a call from a Marine who was desperate. And if you have ever spoken to somebody who is suicidal, you can even hear it across the phone if you listen. And he had been on a traditional service dogs list. And he'd been on that list for several years, and he was losing hope. It was heartbreaking because trainers that he was calling were saying it would cost $10,000, it would cost $20,000, it would cost $35,000. And for a veteran who is lost, who is struggling to get by, and I think I felt that transition pain that I felt when I got out. I said to him, you know, look, I don't know what post-traumatic stress is. I don't know the challenges that you face, but if you're willing to take a chance on me, I'll make this happen. And he said, okay, well, what are you going to charge me? When I said, if you're willing to take the chance on me, and I said nothing. And he started crying on the other end of the phone. And he said, "Are you for real?" And I said, "Yes, I'm telling you, veteran to veteran, I'm giving you my word of honor. I will always be wealthy because I have my integrity and honor." And that started the journey that began Operation Freedom Paws, because I dove in to understand what issues our veterans were facing coming home. What was post-traumatic stress? And how could a service dog help? That one veteran that one Marine in January of 2010, just yesterday we added our 555th client, 70% of which are veterans, and the other 30% are made up with first responders, kids, and others. Along the way, what I discovered is that this is my life's purpose, that journey, everything that I've gone through led me to be doing this and to create Operation Freedom Paws.
When I started One Step Closer, I always wanted to serve the U.S. military in some form or fashion. Every time I thought back on when I started with horses, when I was 10, and that time in my life, and that pain that I was going through, trying to understand what was happening to my dad, I went to the horses. They were my friends. They understood me. I didn't have to hide my tears from them. And I was thinking how maybe those horses could help those veterans in the same manner. And so I, reached out to the VA, and it took a while, but they paid us a visit, and they decided to partner with us. Over a course of a year, we had over 1,000 veterans come through our gate, One Step Closer. And those horses were helping them. They were amazing at helping them. Breaking down walls, finding their way back. There was a veteran that was kind of shut out from his group. He was kind of loud, kind of boisterous, and kind of hard to be around, hard to love, and actually very fearful of the horses. A little while later, he asked if he could come in. And then he sat down on a barrel, and my mare Reba walked over to him, like horses do, and greeted him with her muzzle. And then she promptly circled around, laid down right in front of him. And he, jokingly said, "Did I kill her? Did she die? What happened?" I said, "No, she just showed you how vulnerable she is. And she wouldn't do that unless she trusted you."
Most people who join the military, there's some sense of service that they're wanting to go beyond, and that translated well for nursing. There was a life and deathness about the military that translated well to nursing. I take care of children with cancer and bone marrow transplant, and I do global outreach. I go to some pretty poor countries. I got to go to Haiti during the quake and ply my wares as a nurse practitioner. I've been to Ethiopia. I've been all throughout Central America. And I've been involved in some pretty cool projects, but under some pretty primitive circumstances. That has modulated, made it okay that I didn't go to combat.
Well, it started really with the Freedom Fest run, but I got the idea then that I should do another run, and this time it would be for veterans. And so I started a run where we would have 5 partners that were in the business of helping veterans transition, with the hopes that these organizations would not only get money, but that would promote them. So their names would get out, and there would be more people that could hear their message. And so it kind of was just organic like that. First year, I think I had 100 runners. Last year I had 285. I have gotten a lot of support, and it's been a really wonderful experience for me. So I think I've probably raised somewhere in the name of $250,000 for just veterans organizations. No, I think it's magical. We did the run. We hung around, hugged each other, we sang, we talked more. It was very gratifying. I really like it. Plus, all the veterans partners are all there, so they're all talking to people, which is really gratifying for me because it was more of a family thing.
Several years ago, I heard about Wreaths Across America, where you put wreaths on veterans' graves. I've done that at the Morgan Hill Mount Hope Cemetery.
The mission of Wreaths Across America is to focus specifically on our veterans and those that have given their lives, those who have fallen, those who have passed away over time and are now buried in our local cemeteries. And we're wanting to recognize them, but also recognize their families, because not just the veterans make this sacrifice, their families do too.
I kept telling the city, different people, that I want to build a monument downtown. It was 91. It took me 4 years, but I said, I'm not just doing it for the Vietnam guys, I got to do it for everybody. I didn't want people to forget about these men.
I try to make as many military events as I can. I'm always at the Veterans Memorial here in Morgan Hill on Veterans Day and Memorial Day, and then I'll go to a celebration and welcome home for Vietnam vets at the Gilroy Vet Hall.
Veterans Day, when we thank those that have served, and Memorial Day, when we come with a more tender word for those who have suffered loss, are all aspects of, of service within the community.
Part of what I think about Veterans Day is what that must have been like. The 11th hour of the 11th day, in World War I, that was supposed to be the war that ended all wars. I don't go to parades. It's a personal day. When I went to DC a few years ago, went to the Korean War Memorial and the Vietnam War Memorial.
Well, my wife and I spent 2 weeks in DC maybe 5 years ago, and we went to all the memorials, the Korean War Memorial, World War II Memorial, the Vietnam Wall.
The Vietnam Memorial, when you're there, there's just a presence. It's everyone's name, and people are looking for their loved ones' names.
Actually found a couple friends on it, and then I found one of my high school classmates. And that's just, makes you think.
The Korean Memorial is so touching. They have such meaning and such emotion for you, when you see these things and you think about what they represent.
You go to these memorials and see names on these walls, and it doesn't mean anything. They're just names on the walls. You don't know their story. You don't know what it was, their life. And so I am working with this Japanese American Association. They have the names of all the Japanese Americans who have died fighting for our country from the Spanish-American War until now. And so we're working on that project.
Less than 1% of our nation's population will ever raise their hand and promise to defend the Constitution and our country with their very lives.
If someone was thinking about enlisting today, currently, if you feel like you are being drawn to it, then absolutely you should join. But if you're not willing to be ready to serve when you are called to serve, then don't join.
I would say first consider it's armed forces and that it's, life and death on that level. It's armed forces. I mean, that means that you're going to be on the business end of a gun.
First of all, the military is not for everybody. You have to understand that when you raise your right hand, whether you go to combat or just stay stateside or go wherever you go, and you give up the right of your life for the next 3 or 4 years. That's the downside. The upside is you have years to mature, get trained, learn the value of teamwork, and you're going to find out a lot about yourself going through it. So I would suggest you do it.
It's also an opportunity to have an adventure in life. The military is a good place for that.
Understand that there are a variety of jobs, of tasks within the military that may meet your gifting and your hopes for training. And so choose your billet wisely.
The problem with the military is that, I mean, most of us that joined felt righteous about it, but when you get into it, it's a moving target in terms of how you're applied politically. But we had sworn the oath, and we had signed on the dotted line that said that, you know, we would do these things no matter what. And I was good to my word, but I felt funny about it. And it certainly expedited my resigning my commission.
The Vietnam War was a war of killing. There's no other excuse for it. It was for killing. Our mission, we called them search and destroy missions. The Vietnam War was fought in civilian areas. They were fought across farms and hamlets. So all that artillery, the napalm, the bombs, they were killing civilians.
When two countries go to war, such as happening in Russia and Ukraine or in Israel and in Palestine, you don't have any winners. Everyone's a loser. And you can claim victory, but your sons and daughters come back shattered, and it drags your country down. And so that reality I can't change. The reality I can change is when they do come back, they need help.
And somehow that's got to stop. Because we're not doing any good. We just need to stop. Just stop. Easy to say, yeah?
So we are the country we are, I've always felt, because of the military. And before that, the patriots that fought in the Revolution.
With the military, part of my problem was the politics are a moving target. I believe in a strong military. I think that we need one. And what happened in World War II was truly not righteous. And we had to defend ourselves against, you know, ever enlarging threat. But there are some times where we think we have to do that we're not being righteous.
There's a word that's on the cemetery, I think, that says, freedom is not free. Somebody has to fight for that. Somebody has to give out their life for that. So yeah, and we need armies. We need armies to defend us, to right wrongs, but we don't need to have armies to create wrongs.
You know, for me, it was an incredibly, it was a positive experience on the whole in terms of how it provided clarity with my life's purpose. On one hand, I wondered, you know, did I really validate my time in service because I really didn't go to combat? On the other hand, it was like, well, I'm good with that because in retrospect, I had friends that stayed in and they came back pretty twitchy, a lot of them affected. And, you know, you've heard some homeless because they didn't know how to hold down a job. And you wonder how you would have been tagged if you had seen something like that. You really don't know. So how did it feel? It was exciting and scary and sometimes dark.
So I'm glad I did it. And I really feel lucky I survived it. But there's so many people that are in the military and they're dedicated. And that just makes your heart feel good.
I think it absolutely has shaped my life, being a veteran, because once you're in the service and you understand that these are the people that if we're in trouble as a nation, that is who they call to take care of that trouble. We haven't had a draft since the early 70s, so it's the people in the military that feel the call to serve their country. And that, to me, deserves a different level of respect.
Having served in the Army, I am extremely proud of, and I wouldn't change it for anything in the world. The good, the bad, the ugly, the harassment. I look back on basic training and those 40 women in that barracks room and how diverse, how different, but yet how similar we were. even to this day, it reminds me that we have far more in common than we have differences. I don't see race. What I see is a human being, and I see their character. And that, I think, really came from my military experience, because it will build character, and if you stay true to your morals and your values, those will go with you through life.
I was able to do a lifelong dream. I did things I didn't know existed. I went places I didn't know existed. I met people that were phenomenal people. I had an experience that was rewarding. You meet people in the service that are all pulling in the same direction, so you have that common bond.
There is a sense, too, that when we find each other and we see each other again, maybe years later, that we recognize one another, and there's a joy to see that we are still alive. And so there's a camaraderie, a sense of family in the military services that I don't think anyone but those that have served really understand. I certainly didn't understand it till all of a sudden I found myself in our nation's service.
Two friends of mine got killed over there out of my pilot training class, Ron Kelsey and Tom Duckett. They got shot down the same day, December 10th, 1970. So those guys are going to be forever 23, 24. I come back, I look at those guys and the 58,400 more that are always going to be the way they were back in the 60s and 70s and what they never got to be. And I look at my life. I am blessed beyond measure. I couldn't wish for a better life, and it's more valuable to me knowing there are so many people that I was with that aren't having that opportunity, never had that opportunity, will never have that opportunity. So I'm lucky. I know I'm lucky, and I know it every day.